Hello, Victor Purton here. Welcome to the Centre for Optimism's Optimism Cafe. And today we are truly blessed with our guest, Sally Capp, the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, a realistic and infectiously optimistic leader, but caught in an environment of extreme COVID restrictions, a nighttime curfew from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., and in a declared state of disaster. How do you lead optimistically in that environment? How does the optimistic leader maintain her optimism? So to help me ask those very practical questions, I'll be joined by Janine Kirk, the head of Phoenix Australia, one of the most important mental health research institutions in Australia and indeed the world, and a former head of the Committee for Melbourne, having led it through Melbourne's time of crisis in the 1990s. And Sally was Janine's successor in that role. And so too we have Robert Masters, the chair of the Centre for Optimism, a former political journalist, now Australia's leading crisis communications expert, and having had Australian and international roles in leading the industry, the communications industry, through good times and bad times, and in great demand for his advice on how to lead optimistically through these times. So the first thing we always do at the Centre for Optimism is to ask our panelists what makes you optimistic. Sally Capp, may I ask you, what makes you optimistic?
Oh gosh, it's such a big question, and I wish you'd started with Janine.
I'm glad I started with you, Sally.
I think it's a good mixture of nature and nurture for me, optimism. I seem to have been born with some genes that make me a very hopeful person, as somebody that actually looks to the future with excitement. But also the nurture part of it is that sense of confidence that has come, I think, over time. You can build up optimism over time. A confidence that things can work out. And one of the most compelling things for me about optimism is that it's a feeling that is my feeling, and that I can own as an approach and a feeling, not something that I have to wait for somebody else to create for me, or that somebody else can. I think they can knock it about occasionally, but they can't ultimately impact it. It's something I can really own. So it's a very special thing to me, optimism.
I think you've nailed it, Sally. It's not a silver lining in every dark cloud. It's knowing that things will work out in the end if you persist, and you exemplify that. Janine, what makes you optimistic?
I think a little bit like Sally was saying. I think you tend to be an optimistic person or not, glass half full, glass half empty, and maybe that's from nurture, and also working through my career with a range of extraordinary people who have achieved great things. I mean, Sally's career is fantastic example. And when you work with people who are doers, who like to get results, who love to collaborate, who like to feel engaged, I think that helps. I think the other thing is that we live in a fantastic city and state. And I think Victorians and Melburnians are fighters. You know, as many on this call would probably remember, Melbourne went through some tough times in the 80s and 90s. We had high unemployment. A lot of major headquarters were leaving to go to other capital cities. It was really tough times. And I think people just said, enough's enough. They got together, they collaborated, they identified the opportunities. And then, you know, mind you, it's 20 years later, we have an extraordinarily vibrant city. We've got great restaurants and cafes. We have live music. We have events. We have great arts and theatre. We have terrific biotechnology companies. We have great technology companies generally. And suddenly you see this whole transformation. And I think Melburnians love that. And many visitors, of course, love that. And we want to get back to that. I think something like a pandemic kind of makes you realize what you had, and we don't want to lose it. You know, it's a temporary suspension, yes, but we don't want to lose it. And so I think we're going to come out fighting. I think we're going to come out and back each other and make things happen. And so that's why I'm excited, because the opportunities are there to really reshape our city, keep all the great things and address all the issues that we know as a city we need to address. So that's why I'm optimistic.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Robert Masters, what makes you optimistic?
Well, Victor, they say that you only inherit about 25% of optimism. So I like to think that there are more people in the world who are actually moving that 25% to a higher percentage. And the nice thing about that is that the gratitude that people have when you do something that is of a positive nature. And just like Janine and Sally were saying, if you can get people into a situation where they feel positive about a city or what they're doing, the outcomes that will come, that actually enhances society. So it's the gratitude that people have from what you're actually doing. So be positive and have an optimistic outlook.
Wonderful, thank you. That was superb. So, Lord Mayor Sally, we've got empty streets, we've got a pandemic, we've got a stage 4 shutdown, you've got a curfew on the city, the government's declared a state of disaster. How do you, as what I would call a realistic and infectiously optimistic leader, remain optimistic yourself and infect your population with it?
Good question. I feel even more buoyancy having just listened to the start of this conversation and being part of this forum. So thank you very much. There's no doubt we're in a situation that nobody wants to be in. And we're also in a very extreme situation that we haven't experienced before, a global pandemic that has basically shut our city down. And I still get to walk around the streets occasionally of the city. Obviously, I live in the city as well, so it's within my 5 kilometres for exercise. And it's like being in a disaster movie because our streets are just so quiet. And I keep expecting something to jump out at me from that, but don't let me digress down a rabbit hole. So what makes me optimistic? Well, it really goes to so many of the bases that I have used throughout my life that has supported my optimism. Firstly, I want to say I'm actually a very pragmatic person, so I deal really well with the what is possible and what can be achieved, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But here are some things that really keep me going. Janine touched on this a moment ago, and that is, to me, optimism is a lot about having options. And Melbourne as a city and a community has fantastic options for us to leverage and build upon, even to build out of a crisis. We've got some fantastic foundations that underpin our economy, like a world-class education sector. We have great foundations such as the collaborative nature of our community, and Janine is an inspiration to me as I followed her into the Committee for Melbourne, but in so many of the other organisations and roles she's had of bringing people together, and knowing that in Melbourne it's been an absolute hallmark of who we are, is that when we need to rally together, we do, and we cooperate and coordinate really well. And that gives us a lot of options. We have always been an outwardly focused city. I think we can be more outwardly focused and realise that there's an enormous world out there with people that want to help, but that want to participate proactively in our future and that have experiences that can help us. And we have, of course, enormous resources of dedicated Melburnians right here, which means that we've got good options for the future. And I think that really drives a lot of my personal optimism always, is searching across and seeing that to any of the challenges we face, it's useful to have options. I was going to use one other O word before I hand back, because I've got a lot to say on all of this, but another thing that's really important to me around optimism goes to the pragmatism of outcomes. I'm an outcomes focused person, and so many people on this call will be outcomes focused. So I don't get caught up in the frustrations of somebody else trying to own something, or resources not being mine, or me needing to control something. I'm really happy to roll on the wave of energy and resources and ebullience and all of the things that go into driving towards outcomes, other people's expertise and experience. Because if we're outcomes focused, we can keep maneuvering our way through so many of the machinations that go on towards an outcome. And if we stay focused on that outcome, it's surprising how often we can get there. And I guess that's where the pragmatism comes in. I really stay focused on the things that we can achieve. There's a great saying that I say to myself every day, sometimes more than once a day, depending on what's going on. And it says that I'm only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And I will not let what I cannot do interfere with what I can do. And I think what's really great and fuels optimism is that sense of actually achieving something and that focus on outcomes. So for Melbourne, with the sorts of leaders that we have and that I can see on this Zoom, with a focus on outcomes and with knowing that we have a lot of options, it's about how we leverage them together. It really helps me build up a sense of confidence about our future.
I love that you know, to do what you can do and not to worry about what you can't do. I think, you know, there's so much wisdom in that. If I could throw to you, Janine, to talk to Sally about leadership and optimism.
Thank you very much, Victor. Sally, I'm sure you and the council are thinking about post-pandemic. That's how optimistic you are. And you'd be looking at some of the things that the council can drive in terms of you know, their capability, and some of the issues and social issues we probably even had before the pandemic. I recall, again, way back in the 80s and 90s, one of the issues was that Melbourne was hollowing out as a city because people were in the suburbs. How to get people back into the city. And I know that the council did a very proactive thing by taking an office building and converting it into apartments, because the private sector didn't see that anybody would want to live in the city. And by that very act of risk and face and backed with data, saying that people could and did want to move back into the city, you actually changed the nature of our city. In fact, it was called the Policy 3000, and I thought it was postcode 3000, but I was told no, they just wanted 3,000 people to live in the city, and now I think we've got 25,000 plus sort of thing. So it goes to show that a city council, in kind of taking that action, setting the example, can actually change the dynamic of a city. So what do you see in terms of your leadership when you look back at the legacy? What you'd like to see Melbourne look like post-pandemic? What are the key one or two things that you think would make a real difference?
Well, you're right, Janine. We are definitely deep into thinking and planning for what we call AC. There's BC, before coronavirus, and AC, after coronavirus. So that we are ready to go as restrictions start to ease. There's a phasing ahead of us, because until we have a vaccine, we're going to be needing to live with this virus, and we have to be conscious of that and think about our planning in that way. Nonetheless, postcode 3000, we'll just keep calling it that, as one of the most transformational urban renewal policies that people still come to Melbourne to learn about and take stories back to their cities. A time when everybody was leaving, we were described as a moribund city in a rust bucket state. And we have managed to, over the 3 decades since then, become one of the most livable cities in the world. And that came from the foresight of really being willing to change things up. And that's where we're at the moment. What do we want to protect about our city as it was BC, and what can we do to change things up to create really a new trajectory for our city, because that's what COVID is enabling us to do. It's a disconnect. It's a painful disconnect. And the great oracle Homer Simpson called it a crisis-opportunity. How do we make sure that we leverage this time to come back better than we were? There are 6 streams of how we're going about it at the moment. And it does build on some of our current capabilities. We have become a city for residents. When postcode 3000 started, there were 685 residents registered in the HODL grid. There are now 42,136 people in that same HODL grid, to your point, Janine. And they are the heartbeat and the pulse of our city, and they underpin so much of what happens in our community and economy. We know there is a housing shortage in Australia, Victoria, Melbourne. How do we encourage more people to come in and live? That there's a diversity of housing options and that there's affordability in our housing. So that's one really big stream. And maybe if people are leaving some commercial spaces, we can convert them. But at the moment, our data is saying that, you know, we should be okay on the commercial space. So it's how do we deliver more housing, and we're up for that. We're also looking at how do workers return. Of the 950,000 people that would come into the city every day BC, about half of those, just over half, were workers who would come into the city. And of course, as part of their working day, they'd go to the dry cleaner, they'd get a coffee at a cafe, they'd stop at a bar on the way home, they'd get takeout from a restaurant, they'd go to an art gallery, etc. So those workers are absolutely key to who we are as a city. And one of the biggest barriers to workers returning is the use of public transport. And we're working hard on how do we help people use public transport safely during a COVID world, socially distanced world, but also what are the other options for travel, including bicycles. I'll just quickly run through the rest because I could talk about this for ages. But what are the new industries, new skills and jobs and businesses? And I'd love to hear particularly from some of the kids on this. We're looking at more startups, more tech hubs and technology. What are people-centered responses? And is social entrepreneurialism that thing that Melbourne can place a stake in the ground and say we are a global leader finding places for social entrepreneurs within our economy. We're also looking at what do we do to play. I call it play. It's a pretty simple word, but it's fairly sophisticated. All of the retail and hospitality offers, how do we revive and rejuvenate those sectors that are key to how we are renowned globally and the experience that people have locally. And of course, our arts, culture and sporting precincts. We are so lucky. These foundations, I mean, I worry about the grand final going to another state, but frankly, no one will ever have the MCG. So even if it goes away briefly, it'll be back because we have the most amazing infrastructure, the NGV and their triennials, the State Library. I could go on and on, Arts Centre. We have those now. And so it's a matter of how we reinvigorate those. And the last thing I really wanted to finish on, which you touched on, Janine, it's so important. We call it dedication to progress. How do we use this time to accelerate our way forward on key things like homelessness and providing housing as a right to every single person in our community. And we've made some terrific ways forward during COVID on that. How do we really tackle climate change? This is a time COVID has shown us mass behaviour change and listening to experts. Climate action has been with us frustratingly for too long as a debate. How do we push forward? And then the other theme there is multiculturalism, starting with how do we properly recognise and celebrate our traditional owners and our Aboriginal culture, which is so distinctive and important for our past and our future, and the role, of course, that so many cultures have played in making Melbourne such a wonderfully distinctive, exciting place. So that gives you some insight into the themes that we're looking at as we move forward in the City of Melbourne.
Great, Sally, thank you.
Sorry, I'm galloping, everyone.
No, not at all. And I think, Victor, I could probably get one more shot at giving Sally a platform. And that's really about we were talking before, as you know, I chair Phoenix Australia, which is the Australian Centre for Post-Traumatic Mental Health. And of course, mental health is a big issue of debate, particularly in Victoria, since we've been hit the hardest. We're the only state and city in that's considered to be a disaster state and city. So mental health is always there, but I think under these conditions, it's obviously highlighted a lot more. How do you, as a leader, and I think I was just chatting before you joined us about it's important that we support our leaders because their mental health is just as important in the sense that they're trying to look after everybody else's mental health. But unless we have leaders that are well balanced and their mental health is well looked after, we need them to lead during these times. How do you look after your own mental health? Apart from the fact that you're an optimist, so that helps.
Yes.
I don't know too many optimists who have poor mental health, but by the same token, you've got 2 sons, a husband, you live in the city. As you said, 90% of the traffic is down in the city. As Lord Mayor, you must walk out into those empty streets every day and think, my God, I've got to lead at a time when it's incredibly difficult. So how do you look after your mental health?
Janine, it is so tough at the moment, and this is absolutely central to how we're going to be able to respond to and survive through this crisis. The first thing is I am perfectly comfortable with saying this is a depressing time, that I cry. I met with the Treasurer last week of Victoria, and I cried in that meeting, talking about the situations confronting particularly so many of our small business owners, and hearing their stories every day is it's beyond difficult. It's completely emotional, and it can be all consuming, and frankly it can be completely overwhelming too. And it's because this crisis is causing hardship and devastation to an extent that I haven't experienced in my lifetime, and that's 5 decades. So it's really, really tough. And I think saying that and acknowledging that is really important, and being okay to feel emotional about that is important for me. And I've got some great mates and a wonderful family who are okay when I vent. Luckily, I don't vent on Twitter. I vent in private texts, and I know people will receive that as a bit of a download from me so that I can decompress in that way. But the great thing for me is that I'm in a role where I can feel a sense of purpose every day, and it goes back to that sense of doing things and feeling purposeful and staying focused on outcomes. I'm also surrounded by the most incredible people in the community who are being resourceful, resilient, compassionate, selfless, agile, ingenious in terms of how they are surviving. And those stories lift me up every day as well. And so I get to have that balance. And it's very extreme. The balance has never been more extreme than it is at the moment. But nonetheless, I feel very grateful. And I'm working with a team at the City of Melbourne who have the same drive, the same focus on delivering as much care and support as we possibly can, and then looking towards the future. And I feel very lucky that I'm in that environment, because I am confronted every day with the sharing of stories of others who are doing it much tougher than I am.
Yeah. Thanks, Sally. Robert, I think I handball it to use a footy term.
Thank you. I'll pick up the pass. Sally, one of the things you mentioned, which I also read about, but you talked about people-centered responses. And we know from the psychologist Seligman that he basically says everyone is wired for connection. And I read, I think it was at the weekend, where you were encouraging people to write a letter of love as to why you love Melbourne. And so with Melbourne being a livable city, which everyone had great pride in that phrase, are you looking at a new phrase to take over as a livable city, or is it a lovable city? what phrase are you putting around the whole of all your communication strategies?
Yeah, great question, Robert, and really open to some good suggestions on this. I really love alliteration, if you haven't noticed, and so I've been morphing to Melbourne as a livable, lovable, luminous city, and extending those themes into the future. And I think one of the great things about the program about writing a love letter to Melbourne is that in a time when we've all experienced so much change, and I think there's the saying that it takes 12 weeks to create a new habit or change bad habits. It's one of those. And of course, for weeks now, people have been away from the city. They've changed their work habits, their social habits, their leisure habits. And life seems completely different. And I think one of the lovely things to do through writing a love letter to Melbourne is to remind ourselves of the things that we love about the city. And one of the overwhelming features of the feedback so far is that Melbourne is a great gathering place. It's always been, and I remember, so many different shows come here and events come here because Melburnians are great participants. We get excited and involved in things, and we love to support different events, from small community events to global sporting events. We are great enthusiasts, and it's been one of the things about the feedback of reminding ourselves what do we love is that we actually love getting together to get excited about stuff. And weird and wonderful things have happened in the city of Melbourne over the years, different activities, and we can't wait until people can come back together again. In fact, one of the ideas I have for when social distancing is a thing of the past, to really mark that turn in our history, and I'm open to some feedback today, is that I'd love it if Melbourne could set the world record for the biggest hug. It's actually held by the city of Ottawa, 10,552 people hugging simultaneously, and I can see our city streets full of people hugging appropriately. 10,553 volunteers will be looking for at the appropriate time, and that'll really mark when we have moved into a new paradigm in our city.
I love that. One of the things at the centre that we've debated quite often is that everyone is talking about the new normal. We don't believe in the new normal. We believe in a better normal, and you've just outlined that, even with the hug, because that's a better position than a new position to take in our thinking. So with that as a better normal, is there any particular issue that you think the city should address, apart from the hugging and that, but is there any particular issue that weighs on your mind that the city should address into having a better normal as far as the city is concerned?
Yeah, and Robert, at the City of Melbourne, we say it's not about the new normal, it's about the new extraordinary. And there are so many things, of course, where we'd love to see a new extraordinary, but just to come back to something I touched on earlier, and that is that during COVID, we've seen the most extraordinary response to those who are the most vulnerable in our community, being our rough sleepers, and more of an awareness and very swift and rapid action to people experiencing homelessness. We know as a result of COVID itself that economic hardship, the levels of unemployment, businesses not being able to reopen, etc., that there's going to be more pressure on housing and homelessness than ever before. And so with these new levels that we've managed to reach, albeit that we have people in temporary accommodation, we're really saying amongst the stakeholders involved, state government, local government, all of the support agencies, the rough sleepers themselves, that we've reached a new level here and there is no going back. To to go back on something that is so fundamentally important, that was such a conundrum that we couldn't seem to crack, and that we have made these big steps forward. To contemplate going back to the situation BC is unacceptable. I mean, homelessness full stop in a country like Australia is unacceptable, but going backwards on something that has been a success story out of COVID is completely unacceptable. So I think really where there are new positive stakes in the ground, not letting those go and making sure that we keep moving forward from those new thresholds is absolutely paramount, and we can't lose the momentum that we've gained there.
I'm very pleased you said that, Sally, because when I chaired the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, that was one of our key platforms, and we gave a lot of money to actually helping that get started. So it's good to see that you picked it up, and you have my full support in the direction in which you're going. So Victor, do you want to open it up to questions or other people now?
Yes, no, so we've got so many questions on the list. So people vote them up and vote them down and add comments. And Sally, John Richardson is a great old friend of mine. He's, well, not old, he's a friend of mine. He's been an ambassador all over the world, Brazil and elsewhere. He's a global figure. And where has he chosen to live? But Melbourne. And he's picking up the question that really erupted on the chat about homelessness. So John, number one, what makes you optimistic? Number two, why do you live in Melbourne? And number three, ask your question of Sally.
That's fantastic, Victor. It's a real pleasure to be here and to hear some of the wonderful quotes that you are all coming up with. I can only agree with those commentators who said, write them all up so we can use them all the time. Let me change that. Why did I come to Melbourne? Well, when I retired, I had a choice of where I could live in Australia, anywhere basically. And after looking at it and looking at all the options, I decided to change or exchange warmth for culture, for vitality, for the whole buzz of the existence of living in Melbourne. Mind you, that buzz is a little bit subdued at the moment, but it will come back. What makes me optimistic, and this really picks up, I think, the points that Sally has just made so eloquently, it's really impressed me that we have been able to tackle in the course of this coronavirus long-standing social blights on our society, homelessness, which we should never have, as Sally says, in a society as affluent as ours. How can we tolerate that? And it's a problem that we have simply accepted, and we are able to solve it in a very short time. I would really hope, now admittedly that's on a temporary basis, but it actually showed us, and that's what makes me so optimistic. If we want to address these issues, we can, if we have the will. And it shouldn't just take a crisis to give us that will to tackle them. So Sally, what I asked a long time ago, I guess why Victor picked me up, was, are you optimistic that we can do something to come out with a new extraordinary, in your lovely terms, rather than reverting back to the old norm where we were prepared to accept so many things which in our society we shouldn't accept. And I also wanted to congratulate you for the leadership that you have shown in that area in making that happen and removing what had been, to me, having visited Melbourne over many years, something which I'd seen as a really growing problem and a real blight on such a wonderful city and society. So are you optimistic that we can come out of this and learn from it and move to a new extraordinary?
Yeah, I am, John. Thank you for all of those comments. I do feel very optimistic about where we can get to. And in some ways, it's as much about the levels of cooperation as it is about anything else. It's the sharing of information. It's the catching balls that might slip through. It's about combining resources, and it's that level of cooperation on this issue that we look back now and think, wow, we thought we were working well together, and really it's gone to a new level. The challenge, though, is a real one still. I'm going to be the pragmatist as well. The fact is that we've underinvested in public housing for decades now, and we've all had a role to play in that. How did it come to be that election issues such as infrastructure for roads and bridges and rail became more important than infrastructure for housing? And this has been a theme that has gone on unchecked for a very long time now. So I think part of the solution is our whole public narrative and conversation, and what do we expect as individuals in this country and as voters to say that housing is a human right, it is critical, essential economic infrastructure. And really what we've seen a lot of during the pandemic is moving resources to areas that are critical. And I think we've all got to say really loudly that housing is critical and we expect it, and that resources, reform and incentives need to move for us to build more housing as quickly as possible. And then we really will be making some significant gains, because the temporary housing won't be available forever. And so we need some of those longer term solutions. So that's the pragmatist, and it's a big focus for our advocacy at state government and federal government level. I'll just finish with one other thing. When I first came into local government and started talking about our rough sleepers, I was told over and over again, oh, that's not a local government issue. It is a local government issue. It's every individual's issue. It's a federal government and a state government issue. We all have a responsibility, and we all have something we can do to help fix it. So we need to move forward with that approach.
Well, if anything is going to give me a sense of optimism, it is a response like that, Sally. That's a wonderful way to tackle that whole issue. And it has to be done, as you say, at every level, rather than people simply handballing it off to the next level. Thank you, Victor, for such a wonderful opportunity to participate, and it's great to see you too, mate.
Now, Eshan Mirash, you have a question for the Mayor.
Hello, yes, I do. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Victor, and thank you, Sally, for being here with us. And the question I have is, I mean, obviously all of us have learned a lot about this pandemic, whether that be for how personal hygiene will be changing and how this disease and how everything can just spread through the air alone. So the question I had was, will there be any changes that are going to be made to the tourism, from a tourism perspective and a residential perspective post-pandemic, that will be carried on for years and years to come to sort of encourage people to relocate to Melbourne and to make Melbourne their home?
Oh, great question, Sean, because as we said, having residents in our city is really important. One of the first things that we've been doing a lot more of, as you can imagine, is cleaning the city. And again, one of those elements that for a long time people have complained about: rubbish in our city and rubbish in the streets. And of course, now we're down to cleaning light poles and tram stops and all sorts of things in high volume areas. So I think a sense of cleanliness and what that means for reassuring people around safety and health is going to be an ongoing theme. We've got hundreds of people out cleaning our streets at the moment, and we're grateful for the work that they do. I really hope that the pandemic doesn't mean that all of a sudden we become disconnected from each other physically, because so much of the pandemic has been elements I'm just reaching. For example, you know, this is necessary at the moment in terms of mask wearing, but it does create a real barrier to how we communicate. I mean, the signals that we give each other through facial expressions and smiles. I've had a photographer say, smile with your eyes, because in mask wearing, people can't see other things. So I do hope, we're going to come back to being able to, you know, physically interact with each other, but we have learned new lessons about how important personal hygiene and actions and the implications that has on other people. I hope that means we're also more thoughtful and caring about the future, and positioning ourselves as a community that cares, that can, you know, we need to take the major behaviour change of a lockdown and turn those into positives. The fact is, millions of people have isolated and have participated in a lockdown because we know that by doing that, even though it creates adjustments and sacrifices individually, that's what's good for our community and the health of others. And it's such a strong theme, and it's a great way of galvanizing, and we're going to need to harness more of that as we go forward. So there's some sort of central themes, but there's no doubt that a focus on hygiene and cleanliness will be a theme going forward. And my husband is a germ freak, so he's absolutely delighted that that's going to be part of our future.
Gillian, your question.
Hi, and thanks, Victor. Hi, Sally. Excuse me. I admire your optimism, but I'm wanting to know a little bit more about where do you get your inspiration from? So you've got these optimistic ideas, you want to take us forward, but what's driving that? Where is your inspiration to take us into this new, extraordinary tomorrow?
Good, Gillian. Thank you. It's a great question. I'm more than a glass half full person. I'm a glass full all the way to the top kind of gal. And I mostly get that from the energy of other people. And that comes in many forms. And I actually was not as conscious of this, I guess, part of, I wasn't as conscious of this, of how I am around other people and how valuable other people are to me until I became Lord Mayor, because I must say that one of the daunting things about going into, in my case, small p politics, it's only local government, but one of the daunting things was the amount of time you need to spend with members of the community and listening and taking feedback. Not all of it is positive, as you can imagine. So that's one of the elements that I was thinking, oh, how am I going to handle that? Am I going to have the patience for it? Am I going to be able to dedicate time and be present for those sessions? Because there's no point in going and letting it all wash over you. Gillian, this seems like a very long answer of saying that what I found is that it is those sessions, feeling the passion and interest of people, knowing their commitment to their community, to issues, to our city, not just now, but also people that think very long term and are willing to make adjustments and sacrifices for the long term outcomes. It's exactly those sessions, rather than draining of energy, that actually fill me up with energy. So that's been terrific. The other thing that gives me a lot of optimism and hope is that I've got a very broad group of people who I lean on and I look to. Janine's been a big part of that group for me for a long time. I see the work that Victor's done overseas and here in Melbourne. And being a mayor now and having also worked overseas and established a lot of connections, I'm going back out to all of those connections now, because although we haven't experienced a global pandemic quite like this, if we chunk elements down so that they're in pieces that seem manageable and that we can respond to, which is, you know, really a big way of tackling what seems to be insurmountable, is to chunk things down. There'll be people that have already experienced it, already done it, already tried something and it worked, already tried something and it failed. We'll have different perspectives. So I really draw on those connections of people that I've gathered around me over the decades. And I look to examples. I've become part of a mayor's group. We meet every 2 weeks. Unfortunately, it's at midnight from our time zone perspective, but I would never miss one of them, because there are these gifts that people bring, and I try to bring as well, in terms of experience and perspectives and lessons learned. And I use all of that to keep me full of optimism And I'm a really big believer that humans, wow, we have been resilient in the face of many challenges over centuries now. And if I look to our Indigenous population, it's 65,000 years of enduring. And that gives me a good sense of optimism and hope as well, Gillian. Humanity, we are amazing. We can be disappointing at times, but I think overwhelmingly we are amazing.
Bill Gormley is one of our American audience. So Bill, you've got a question for the Mayor.
Yes, I'm struck as I listen of the great similarities in the problems that you're facing and that we're facing here in the States. And I would hope to take some learnings. I'm focused on the learning industries. We have a combination of our school systems and our historical museums and interpretation sites. I was wondering what you feel the experiences of this quarantine will lead to in terms of changes to your education system in Melbourne and your approach to education from the small children, preschool, all the way up through university. What changes do you see?
Well, Bill, how lovely to have you in this forum. Where are you?
I'm right in the center. I'm in Carmel, Indiana.
Oh.
Right in the center.
Well, I'm a Cincinnatian, so not far from you. Having been an exchange student in 1984 and still have very close ties there in Cincinnati, which I love, the Midwest. Education, well, isn't this a time where the realization of just how critical education is to every aspect of our lives has really come to the fore, from parents who are teaching their kids at home, having a new appreciation for teachers, and that sense of kids needing to be with other kids and their peers, to create a fulsome education, right through to the sense that certainly with employment and the economy going to need time to recover, that upskilling in all its forms in education will be important as we phase our way forward. And then for us in Melbourne, our gross local product, about 60% of that is made up either directly or indirectly from our knowledge sector. So as an economic driver, as well as to every element of problem solving, education will be key. Something that we haven't been traditionally good at, Bill, and we hope that this again sets us on a new trajectory, is that Australia within the OECD ranks in the top 3 for investment per capita in R&D, but ranks in the bottom 3 for commercialisation of the IP. And we need a sense of opportunity here for us to be able to retain our share of talent and attract our share of talent going forward, and commercialisation of IP that comes through a really strong sense of knowledge, appreciating knowledge, investing in knowledge, and commercialising knowledge will be key. And using that as a way of the messaging going out through our cultural institutions. I was interested, you mentioned your involvement with historical institutions. We've just been talking about last week, so that we can get a consistency to the messaging and hopefully make more impact if it also comes through our cultural institutions. And I couldn't speak more highly of the role that education is going to play at every level of our future.
Thank you so much. Look forward to sharing best practices in the future.
Great, Bill. Thank you.
Ben, what's your question for the Lord Mayor?
Thank you, Victor, for inviting us in, and thank you, Sally, so far for your really fantastic words. My question, just on the back of Bill's talking about education, is, we're seeing a generation now that are being upskilled, if you want to talk about upskilled in IT skills very rapidly. I'm wondering where you see the state and the city leveraging off these skills and, possibly, where does this lead to in terms of developing opportunities, industries, or, the next growth sector for the Melbourne economy?
Yeah, Ben, you will know more about this than I do, but thank you for asking the question. Just some quick reflections on this. I think so many things have really risen agendas and focus areas, and two of them have been people and people-focused decision-making and technology. I mean, how underdone are we on technology? And yet it's been sitting there for such a long time. And we have not leveraged it in the way to maximise outcomes, good outcomes. Everything from, how long have we been talking about flexible working? It's certainly been a feature of conversations in my entire working life. And just as an indication, in our workforce at the City of Melbourne, 37% of our workforce were technology enabled to be able to work from home at the start of the pandemic. 85% are now technology enabled to work from home. And we're seeing all sorts of great outcomes from that. Why hadn't we done it previously when, as an employer, we'd said we were dedicated to flexible work practices? It's so many of the perceptions and the infrastructure and resourcing needed to overcome those things. But to the other end of the spectrum, really, one of the things that we're conscious of, and I'd love, again, more thoughts on these sorts of things, is that we've got some areas that we are world renowned for. How do we make them technology enabled and use technology to really facilitate the opportunities that come from those? And I'll use food as an example. I mean, we are renowned globally as a great food destination, and we take a lot of pride in that, from great restaurants through to innovations around food. And could we use technology locally and then internationally to become a food tech hub, taking traditional strengths, adding technology, and using that to create new opportunities and ways in which we can develop both our economy and our reputation, as an example. So if you've got more thoughts on that, Ben, that'd be great. And of course, there are things like sport that we're renowned for, our medical precinct. Take, the foundations that have got us to that point, BC, and leapfrog ahead using technology. The last thing I'll say is that using data and evidence has been so important during COVID, and we need to keep doing that. And when we look at conundrums like public transport and how do we get people back onto public transport when they have to be socially distanced and they're worried about health, big data and the way we use technology and apps to facilitate an efficient PT system, even in a COVID world, is absolutely vital. So that there are practical outcomes as well to technology today and how we use it.
Irene, your question.
Hi, Sally. Lovely to see you here. It's been a fantastic discussion. I'm Melbourne based, and I've had a very mixed sort of experience of COVID. I've had to close an entertainment business that I was running for 5 years, but I also had an education business. So I was actually able, at a time when I actually felt completely helpless, to actually start helping people put their offline services online. But in doing that, we've been working with Victor, and we're actually going to create a project on the habits of an optimist, because we think optimism can be learned, and we'd like to send it out to the world. And my question to you, and that's all coming, by the way, my question to you is, you're an optimist by nature, but do you do anything to practice being an optimist? Like, what practical things do you do? Do you think differently? Do you practice meditation? Do you flip a thought? I don't know, just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And and congratulations, by the way. I mean, your story is one of the ones that really fuels me, or an example of the ones that fuel me every day, of people being agile and can do and finding new ways forward. So congratulations. The things that I do, I have a lot of self-awareness about my own stress levels, and I do need to decompress at times, and I have different activities. I'm a big reader, for example, just time without other noise or demands. So I do a lot of walking, those sorts of things, solitary things, I guess you could say, given that I have so many inputs and forums and discussions at the moment, and that frees up my mind. I wish I knew how to meditate properly. I've got people sending me apps all the time, and maybe that'll be a positive for me coming out of COVID. But can I just finish by saying, because I started with this, Noreen, that one of the best things I do, because I'm an A-type personality, and I'm a good control freak like the rest of us, is that one of my most stressful things is when I feel like things are out of control and they do become overwhelming, and it's harder to be optimistic in those environments, is that I really go back to thinking about those things. What is it that I can do, that I can achieve, that I can manage, and give myself a sense of progress, even in an environment that seems sort of out of my control. That helps me come back to feeling optimistic again. It's that sense of achievement as well. And every tiny little step forward or sense of momentum that I can find in anything, I grab that and I really use it. So I do bring it back to things I can do to feel a sense of momentum. Really helps me with my optimism. So I might chunk something this big down to the tiniest little micro, and I claim it.
I love that. Thank you, Sally. That's great. Thank you.
Good luck with your work. Can't wait to hear about it.
Yes, well, I'll thank everyone. It's been a remarkable session, Sally, and thank you very much for your time. It's the hour's just flown. I think everyone has got a greater sense of optimism as far as Melbourne is concerned, and I look forward to the lovable, huggable city that you're aspiring to. So thank you very much for your time, and for everyone else for participating. Thank you.
And Janine?
So thanks very much. I mean, it's terrific to hear, and I guess it's an overused word, but an authentic leader who actually shares some of their concerns, that, you know, they're not perfect, they have issues the same as everybody else. And I think leaders, a lot is being demanded of leadership at this time. And I think what you have demonstrated is that you're reflective, you're self-aware, and you're somebody who likes to take an idea to an outcome, which is always great with leaders. But just briefly, I've just become chair of an affordable and social housing association.
Oh, good.
Because I believe absolutely it is a fundamental human right to have housing. And my concern is, although Melbourne and Victoria is well behind other states in this area, as we know, the other issue with so many people losing their jobs or having their homes as equity for their businesses, where that waiting queue is going to get longer and longer. And it's a fundamental issue we have to address. So thank you so much for your time and for everybody's participation. Thanks, Victor. Well done, Sally.
Thank you. Thanks for having me involved. I've loved it. Thank you very much. And I feel like you've all given me gifts today, so thank you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that Optimism Cafe. I loved it and I was uplifted by it. Feel free to join the Centre for Optimism or our free mailing list, and go to our website to find the tools that will help you to be more optimistic and to lift those around you. Have a great day.